one of my favorite places I've definitely been to in Mexico. It's absolutely beautiful, and this altar behind me is pretty spectacular. Welcome to Cultura Underground. Today we'll be taking a look at the traditions and celebrations of Mexico's Dia de Muertos, or Day of the Dead, not to be confused with the 1985 George Romero zombie flick of the same name. Dia de Muertos is my favorite time of year in Mexico. I love the explosions of color of the papel picado, or paper cutouts, the beautiful ofrendas, or altars set up around the city, and just the whole concept behind the holiday. If you've seen the Pixar movie Coco, you're probably already familiar with several of the traditions. Although, sometimes, the movies themselves create the traditions. Such was the case with the now infamous Day of the Dead parade in Mexico City, which didn't actually exist before the 2015 James Bond movie Spectre had a memorable scene of an, at the time, completely fictitious parade. The holiday begins on November 1st, which is known as Dia de los Angelitos, or Day of the Little Angels, in honor of the children and babies who have passed. It is said that their souls are so anxious to see their families that they arrive a day before the adults, whose day is celebrated on November 2nd. In recent years, as the popularity of trick-or-treating has arrived in Mexico, Dia de Muertos has also stretched into October 31st, or Halloween. Interestingly, the Celtic origins of Halloween have a lot of similarities with Dia de Muertos, since Celts thought souls of the dead returned home during Samhain, and food and drink were set out to welcome them back. Dia de Muertos traditions differ regionally within Mexico. One of the most famous celebrations occurs in Lake Pátzcuaro, Michoacán, wherein residents ride boats to a cemetery on the island of Janitzio, set up elaborate multi-storied ofrendas, and sleep overnight in the cemetery. In Ocotepec, Morelos, households who have lost loved ones within the year invite visitors inside to pay respects to their ofrendas and offer them tamales and a thick corn drink called atole in exchange for candles to place on the altars. But although Dia de Muertos is celebrated across all regions of Mexico, there is some debate on its origins. Some say that the holiday had pre-Hispanic origins, since the Aztecs had at least 6 celebrations that were similar, including one in particular called Cacholi that was celebrated between October 20th and November 8th. Cacholi honored the god of war, Mixcoatl, and celebrants placed altars of food, such as tamales, near the graves of fallen warriors in order to aid them in their journey to the afterlife. A tradition with obvious similarities to the modern-day custom of ofrendas during Dia de Muertos. The idea that Dia de Muertos has pre-Hispanic origins is also supported by the fact that even non-Aztec indigenous communities within the region celebrate this day. In Chamula, Chiapas, for instance, which is 99.5% indigenous Tzotzil Maya, and is one of the few pueblos not to have been subjugated completely by the Spanish, residents observe the holiday through dance, music, and costumes that don't at all resemble the Catrinas, or dapper skeletons, that are so popular within Mexico City celebrations. However, other historians argue that Dia de Muertos as we know it only really began after the Spanish colonists brought the European tradition of All Souls' Day and All Saints' Day, which are observed on the same days in early November and include the placement of flowers and candles on graves. Most likely, the current iteration of Dia de Muertos draws a little bit from both pre-Hispanic traditions and the European All Saints' Day and Halloween. A perfect example of this cultural mixing is the ofrenda, which is at the heart of Dia de Muertos celebrations. Behind you can see offerings that are put out of food and drink and things that our loved ones would have enjoyed while they were here with us. So you'll often see maybe their favorite alcohol like beer or wine, or here more like mezcal and tequila and pulque. For the children you might see sweets and milk and water put out for them. Many of the traditional food and drink offerings go back to pre-Hispanic times, such as chocolate, tamales, mole, and pulque, an unfiltered alcohol drink from the maguey agave plant with a milkshake-like texture. Other traditional offerings like mezcal and tequila come from the Spanish influence of distillation. But the most popular offering, pan de muerto, or bread of death, is said to come from both pre-Hispanic and Spanish influence. During ritualistic human sacrifice, the Aztecs would cut the still beating heart out of the chest, but the Spanish considered the practice to be completely unchristian, so they forced the substitution of bread for the human heart shortly after the fall of the Aztec Empire. Today, pan de muerto is a simple sweet bread covered in sugar that can only be found in panaderias or bread shops during October and early November. Another common addition to altars are skulls or calaveras made of sugar, and catrinas. Indeed, the holiday has become synonymous with people painting their faces and dressing up as catrinas. The specific catrina itself comes from an early 20th century etching by Mexican lithographer José Guadalupe Posada, and was further made famous by the Calaveras Literarias, a literary critique for and by the working classes that was popularized in the late 19th century and used images of catrinas and calaveras to critique the privileged classes, specifically those who had forgotten their indigenous roots in the pursuit of social status. The calaveras were dressed in dapper clothing and drank pulque and danced, showing that both the wealthy and the poor are the same in the eyes of death. This is a direct reference to the European medieval traditions of danse macabre, an allegorical dance of life and death personified. The Mexican tradition of La Danza de los Viejitos is also a reference to danse macabre, but instead of dressing up as skeletons, little boys dress up as old men as a reference to the fleeting nature of time. Nowadays, the Calaveras Literarias are humorous epitaphs for the still living, written during Day of the Dead. Much like the Catrina, the next element of the ofrenda also came from a 20th century work of art that has since become symbolic of Mexican tradition. The alebrije, with its fantastical colors and often mixture of animals, was first introduced in 1936 by the Mexican papier-mâché artist Pedro Linares. Pedro had fallen gravely ill, and while he lay unconscious in his bed, he says he visited a forest with brightly colored fantastical animals, who were all shouting the word alebrije. When he came to, he put the dreamlike images to reality. Much like the Dia de Muertos parade didn't become a national symbol until after the James Bond movie Spectre, the alebrijes didn't become nationally renowned until after a Mexican craft demonstration exhibition in the United States in the 1980s. In my research, I couldn't find when exactly they became associated with Dia de Muertos, but at some point people began associating them with spirit guides to the afterlife, as was referenced in the movie Coco. This could come from the pre-Hispanic belief that the Cholo Escuincle dog was a gift from the canine god of fire and lightning, Xolotl, to guide the deceased to the underworld. Or it could be something entirely unique. I honestly don't know. But whatever the case, alebrijes have become an important part of Dia de Muertos traditions. The placement of the Virgin Mary and candles are obvious European influences, but the most ubiquitous addition, the cempasúchil, or Mexican marigold, come from an Aztec origin myth about two doomed lovers. Xochitl, or more commonly known as Xochil in Spanish, and her lover Huitzilin would hike up to the top of a mountain and leave flower offerings for the sun god Tonatiuh while swearing their commitment to each other. When Huitzilin was tragically killed in battle, the grieving Xochitl prayed to the sun god to be reunited with her lost love. Moved by her prayers, Tonatiuh sent a ray of sunshine to the earth that transformed Xochitl into a flower as radiant as the sun, and reincarnated her fallen lover as a hummingbird. The legend states that when Huitzilin the hummingbird approached the flower, its 20 petals bloomed suddenly and filled the air with a strong scent. In honor of Xochitl, the Aztecs named the flower Cempasúchil, which later became known as cempasúchil in modern-day Mexico. Nowadays, the cempasúchil is a reminder to celebrate life and love, instead of mourning death during Dia de Muertos celebrations. In addition, its bright colors and distinctive strong smell are also said to guide the spirits of loved ones home to the ofrendas in their honor. To further understand the importance of the cempasúchil in Dia de Muertos, I went to the Mercado de Jamaica, Mexico's largest flower market, and talked to one of the vendors there. We asked him how Dia de Muertos compares with other holidays and how the pandemic in particular affected this year's celebrations.
Bueno, para empezar, si me puede dar su nombre.
Servidor José Díaz Nieto.
Okay. Y esas son sus flores, ¿verdad?
Un poco de flores de las que venden. ¿Para qué se utiliza? Es una ofrenda que se les ofrece a los difuntitos. Para empezar, los pétalos se utilizan como el caminito para donde tiene que caminar un ratito. Y nada más, o sea, pues el aroma que también despide.
Sí.
Pues es una cantidad muy fuerte porque de aquí en la Ciudad de México simplemente se tiene que repartir a los estados de la República.
Claro, entonces como miles, ¿no?
Son miles. Pues. No, Día de Muertos. Se vende
Día de Muertos.
Más, sí.
Sí, pues sí, ya se ve que casi no hay, ¿no? Por la fecha, ¿no? Como ya están.
Por lo de la pandemia.
Por la pandemia
Muchos
también.
Tenían miedo de acercarse, pero bastante.
¿Bastante?
Sí, simplemente yo me estoy confiado, no me puse ni cubrebocas precisamente,
claro.
Pero ya estoy vacunado, cumplí con,
Claro.
aunque no estoy cumpliendo con las reglas de aquí del mercado.
Sí.
No, este año hubo más.
¿Más?
Hubo más gente. Lo que pasa es que se distribuyó en varios días, empezó la venta desde el jueves, viernes, sábado, domingo, lunes y martes.
Bueno.
Cuando muchas veces nada más es 30, 31, día primero y día 2.
Muchísimas gracias.
Cuídense, que Dios los bendiga.
Gracias.
So this flower is particularly important, and they sell thousands of these every year for Day of the Dead. In fact, actually, if you look around, there's not that many left because, as I said, today is November 2nd, so most people have already bought their altars. But it's still a beautiful market to come to visit, and it's something that's extremely important around this time during the Day of the Dead season. This year's Dia de Muertos was especially poignant for Mexicans after almost 2 years into the COVID-19 pandemic. The annual parade was canceled last year due to quarantine, and it wasn't scheduled to occur this year until just a few weeks before, when Mexico finally achieved green light status for the first time since the pandemic began. After the long extended shutdown, Mexico City was suddenly overflowing with crowds and too many activities to enjoy. I'll be completely honest right now and admit that I did not attend most of them because throngs of people still make me really nervous due to coronavirus. The parade was broken up into 4 parts: Tenochtitlan, Corazón de México, or Heart of Mexico, Mexico Today, Magic and Tradition, and a brand new edition commemorating the pandemic. 1,000 volunteers walked in homage to those who died due to COVID-19 in a new segment titled Celebrating Life. If the whole theme of Dia de Muertos is celebrating the lives of loved ones gone instead of mourning them, this year's festivities felt particularly moving. After a year of overwhelming loss and mourning and isolation, among the constant confrontation of the fragility of life, the crowded streets felt like a rebellious victory over the pandemic itself. It was a reminder of the beauty that remains, that the year didn't break us, and that life is worth celebrating. I don't want to end the video on a depressing note, but I would be remiss if I didn't include something I saw on my way back from the Mercado de Jamaica in Metro Pino Suarez. This particular ofrenda is in honor of all the women who have died as a result of the feminicides in Mexico. Their names, written on pink crosses, are placed on pillars along the way, guiding one's attention to the ofrenda bearing their pictures. It was the second display of such a remembrance that I'd seen. The first was in Plaza Rio de Janeiro in Roma Norte. In Spanish, the words read, "No alcanzan el cempasúchil para guiar a todas las que nos quitaron." In English, "The amount of cempasúchil to guide back all the women they took from us is beyond reach." Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content like this.